somebody who spent a little time representing the Valley, fighting for the Valley, City Council, Board of Supervisors, MTA Board, one of the architects of Measure R, now happily retired and busier than he's ever been in his life, Zev Yaroslavsky.
Thank you. Talk about steel wheels.
Thank you. Is this working? Can you hear me?
You just got to hold it closer.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Moderator's prerogative. I forgot to introduce, where's Bob Sears? Bob's right over here. Bob is with Vulcan Materials. They were kind enough to be a sponsor of this event, and I'd be really remiss and ungrateful if I didn't say thank you, welcome. Thank you, Bob.
Well, a lot has been said, and much of it most of it I agree with, so I'm not going to repeat. I do think it pays to step back and kind of see the context of the whole transportation business that we have in Southern California. I always used to talk about the sprawl of Los Angeles compared to other major metropolitan areas in the world, and the best example I can give is the one I use many times, which is if you take a map of Paris, France, and you put the needle of the compass at the Eiffel Tower and draw a circle that's about 7 miles in radius, you pretty much cover all the metropolitan area of Paris. You're in the country in some of the spots. If you do the same thing and put the compass needle at Big Ben in London and you draw a 7-mile radius, it pretty much covers 75–80% of the city of London. If you do the same thing in Los Angeles and put the compass needle at City Hall and draw a 7-mile radius circle, you don't even get to La Brea, and let alone the San Fernando Valley or the San Gabriel Valley or gateway cities and all. It's another way of saying that getting from point A to point B is not the problem that is reflected in the perceptions that you have on Fernando's survey. The problem is getting from point C to point Z. We will not get from point A to point Z in Measure R2, R3, or R4. So we need to be very careful in what we demand. We demand the most efficacious investment in transportation in whatever the proposition is and whenever it is, because you're not going to get it all. 80% of what has come through the transom from all the cogs are going to end up on the cutting room floor. So what is the most important corridor that we have? That's the challenge that I think the San Fernando Valley faces this time around. Measure R in 2008 was put on the ballot rather quickly, and the projects that were funded, with 1 or 2 exceptions, were projects that were already in the environmental process and were in the works. We didn't have anything in the works for the most part in the San Fernando Valley, and as has been mentioned, the Orange Line was built 3 years before Measure R was even conceived. That money came partly from the Metro and a big chunk of it from the state of California when Bob Hertzberg, then in the state assembly, called me up and says, we have a surplus, something we haven't heard about in a long time. Could you use $100 million? And I said, yes. Give me a couple hours, I'll get back to you.
That's not what you said.
And that's how
A little more descriptors on that, Mr. Yaroslavsky.
What's that?
Add a few more descriptors.
Yeah, and that's how the Orange Line got built. Orange Line did fund the Measure R did fund the extension of the Orange Line from Warner Center to Chatsworth. There are a number of corridors in the San Fernando Valley that need to be looked at. One is the extension of the Red Line from NoHo to points northwest of NoHo along the Lankershim Boulevard corridor. One corridor is the Van Nuys Boulevard corridor, which in my judgment is the most important corridor to address. And it's if it's going to be rail, then it's going to probably have to be underground in the narrow stretches of Van Nuys, which is certainly consistent with what Metro is doing on Crenshaw and what they did in Pasadena, in order to get a line through that moves efficiently and quickly to get through that bottleneck in northern Van Nuys and Panorama City. You're going to have to go underground. Another stretch would be extending the Orange Line east to Glendale and the airport, the Bob Hope Airport. Burbank, excuse me, Jess. And those corridors are relatively easy to do. None of them are easy, but relatively speaking, they're easier to do. There's been a discussion here about extending, transforming the Orange Line into a rail as opposed to a busway. I have been cautious about that, and I'm not going to be negative. I just want to point some salient facts out here. That there's only going to be a certain amount of money that the valley is going to get out of Measure R2, whatever it is, $2, $3, $4 billion. I don't know what the numbers are these days.
That was $40 billion in the last comment.
So the question is, to build a rail line, converting a rail line or a new rail line at 13 or 14 miles would be about $2 billion. Is that where you want to spend the lion's share of the money you're going to get out of a Measure R2 is to convert an already existing line, or do you want to get a new line? That's a legitimate question, and it needs to be looked at on the facts and with careful factual analysis.
And can I just add something to that, Supervisor? And that is, you know, Assemblymember Nazarian just had a measure in Sacramento. One of the challenges we had when we were in Curitiba was that those buses were double articulated, not 60 feet, but 82 feet. Assemblymember Nazarian had a measure in the legislature, which now was passed and signed by the governor, that allows the buses to be almost a third larger. So if you were to do grade separations and then do what Assemblymember Nazarian did, the question becomes, how many people could you move across the valley and how fast? And what would that cost in relationship to steel wheels?
So that, and I was about to mention that, I'm glad you did, because that bill has changed the game as far as the Orange Line is concerned. You could increase the capacity of the Orange Line with bi-articulated buses. Bi-articulated meaning 3 buses hooked together instead of 2 as we have now. Increase the capacity by somewhere in the neighborhood of 40%, just like that. It doesn't cost $1.5 billion. So that's something that needs to be factored into it. Grade separations on some of the key north-south streets also should be looked at, because that would enable the buses to move at a much faster clip than they can now. They move at a particularly slow clip when they get into intersections, because when we opened the Orange Line 10 years ago this week, the first thing that happened is we had a number of collisions. Some of you may remember that. I certainly remember that. It was a crisis, and people said, you know, because the critics of the Orange Line warned that we were going to have all these things. So we looked at it, and we figured that one of the reasons the Orange Line was having these problems is, number one, people weren't used to the Orange Line buses coming across, and number two, the Orange Line drivers did not have enough time to react when somebody is crossing the intersection. So you'll notice when you drive the Orange Line, when you ride on the Orange Line, that the speed reduces to about 10 miles an hour at most of the intersections cutting across the valley, especially the western part of the San Fernando Valley. It drives the drivers nuts because they'd like to floor the thing, but they realize that in some of these intersections you can't see the traffic coming perpendicular. So there are a number of things can be done to improve the Orange Line, expanding its capacity, dealing with grade separation, and then getting back to the original idea of the Orange Line, that it would average 35 or 40 miles an hour, including the intersections, rather than what it is now.
And also, I think you mentioned the notion of going out to Glendale and to Burbank, cutting all the way across the full valley.
So in conclusion, I'm not as bad as it sounds, but don't get this cold that I had last week. What happens when you what happens when you sit at Notre Dame Stadium when it's 30 degrees last week? It's one of the great advantages of not being in office anymore. You get to go wherever you want, whenever you want. Seriously, yes. There are a lot of options and a lot of needs. We're not going to cover them all. And Chief Innovations Officer here can be our angel if some of the more innovative tweaks to our bus transportation system in the valley can address things like CSUN, Mission College. Pierce is already taken care of by the Orange Line. But there are a lot of, this is a big city, the San Fernando Valley. And in and of itself, a 7-mile radius circle would not cover the entire San Fernando Valley. And if you look at other parts of the county, it's even more pronounced. So there's an opportunity. The good news is people are prepared to invest in an effective, transportation system improvement or set of improvements. I hope, and I say this to my colleagues in government, especially Paul, who's on the Metro Board, it's the most important thing is to put the investment where the need is greatest, and the need is defined not by economic development, not by subsidized housing, but by traffic and transportation. The housing and other amenities and corollary benefits of transportation will follow no matter where you build the line. So you might as well build the line where the need is.
Perfect.
You don't
That's a
want-
great segue, Supervisor, to
Thank
Dr.
you.
Montez. Because, thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Richard, if you're going to do some, basically, you know, there are many classes at Mission College that end at 10 p.m. 3 of the lines that serve Mission College, I'm told, do not run that late. And the 2 that do, there's a 33 minutes between buses for one line and 60 minutes for buses for the other. And further, for many of the lines that are supposedly serviced for Mission College, the nearest stop is Sylmar Metrolink Station, which is approximately 2.5 miles away. And I know that service stops at the end of the day. So if Dr. Perez can address that a little, just briefly, in terms of going to what Supervisor Yaroslavsky was talking about and addressing, here's a clear need, and we'll talk about Northridge and a couple other ones in different parts of the community that we need to further address as we pull together the political support that Council member and Metro Board member Krikorian talks about.
Yes, I'll follow up with Monty Pettis. I'm president of LA Mission. Wanted to follow up with a comment regarding bus service. You know, our students are environmentally very interested in not driving their cars. They'd rather take a bus, they'd rather take rail, or they'd rather use bicycles when they can. I have been trying for several years to get bus service to my college to not leave at 10 p.m. They leave at 10 p.m. My classes get out at 10:10. And all I'm asking for is for them to stay an extra 15 minutes. And it's been like pulling teeth. We have written letters about that. The other thing is we built a turnabout with our new building, you know, the bomb program, and we have now on Eldridge and Hubbard, if you go down Eldridge past El Carrizo, we have a turnaround. We have asked the buses to, why don't you make a right turn, go down the block, and you can do a turnaround. This would be very helpful because Hubbard is impacted, and the neighbors are very upset that when the bus stops, they got to go around the bus, as well as causing a lot of traffic jams. These are just basic kinds of things that need to be taken care of if you want students to go back and forth and get out in class. We are growing. We're at 11,000 now. I was just talking to my CSUN neighbor. They're 42,000 with Valley and Pierce and Glendale and all the other schools. And the thing you have to remember is access. You know, a lot of our students are first generation, low income, going to school, trying to get a certificate to get a job. If they don't have access to the college or to the training, then they don't have access to their future. So I think it's something you need to consider.
Monty, thank you. I'm going to give it to Colin from Cal State Northridge in a sec. When I first got elected, Mission College was storefronts in San Fernando. It was literally in storefronts. There was an empty storefront that was a classroom, then there was a bar, then there was a liquor store, then there was another classroom storefront. So the fact that we got that campus built and 11,000 students is great news. Congratulations, Monty. Colin?
Small little facility you got there at Cal State Northridge?
Thank you. Yeah,
You gotta put your
42,000.
microphone closer.
Sorry.
Oh, excuse me.
Actually, I'd like to go back to what, sorry, I'm not a good performer. I want to go back to what Councilman Krikorian said a few minutes ago. Short term. So we have, believe it or not, Cal State Northridge is always seen as a commuter campus, quote unquote. Over 50% of our students, so 20,000 students, live within 10 miles of the campus, believe it or not. And it's about the same ratio with our staff. But many of those students, I'll tell you, the biggest pocket we have is up in, if you look at the maps, is up in the Sylmar area. So they're within 10 miles, but it's 45 minutes to get to campus on a bus. So I think your point's well taken that in all of this discussion, we really need to look at some of the rapid lines we believe in particular are incredibly important for us. We have a transit station on campus that we opened a little more than 3 years ago, and we've seen steady increases in use there, about 33% actually in the last couple of years. So that's great, but we're starting to see a little bit of diminishing return coming because of the service issues. So I think that's something that we'd really like to raise the discussion on.
Hey, can I just add something, Glenn? I was at the Northridge neighborhood council the other night, and one of the other challenges that we face, if we want to get the votes to make this happen and deal with neighborhood issues, is the parking issue caused by the demand for these cars. So not only do you have a situation where it's tremendously inconvenient and difficult and expensive for the students to get to school and a tremendous imposition on them, you've got a neighborhood that's up in arms. Can you just briefly give us some insight on that?
Thank you, Senator Hertzberg, for visiting Northridge East last week. You heard from, my name is Glenn Bailey, I'm president of Northridge East. And it's not just our neighborhood council, but Northridge West earlier. When the semester starts, students are trying to find their way, where to park. And I understand about 58% pay for parking on campus. The others arrive in other means, or they park in the neighborhood. So there is a huge impact. Last week, I was actually a mile away from campus and saw vehicles parked on the residential streets and folks walking to campus, a mile away from campus. So it is a big impact, and the residents are understandably upset on the impact that it has in their residential neighborhood. So solving the transportation problem will solve this problem as well.
Along that same line, to the chart that Fernando put up on, and Paul, you were asking about the short commutes. 20,000 live within 10 miles of that campus. And you think about what that impact would be if they had a bus as opposed to being on those streets between Cal State Northridge and Mission College. I mean, same thing for Mission, same thing for Valley, the same thing for Northridge. That would be a tremendous benefit in terms of removing people from that. Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Two quick things. The suggestions about metro line changes that the colleges have suggested seem very sensible changes that aren't the kind of high-tech, really high-cost thing that we spend most of our time talking about. So I'm going to ask Stephanie to have a deep look at those things and see what we can do in the short term to try to improve that service. But the other thing that's worth noting here is that, put on my city council hat now, I asked our Department of Transportation, represented by our general manager today, Salita Reynolds, I asked our Department of Transportation to take a comprehensive review of all of our dash lines and the routes that the dash lines take throughout the city. We started in the Valley, but it became a citywide review because those routes have not been reviewed since before the Orange Line was built. So we have significant transit infrastructure that we've invested in. The demographics, as Fernando was saying earlier, have all changed. So we're taking a new look at dash routes, and those are another opportunity that we would have to service our colleges and other places around the city who just need that kind of easier access to short hops.
What a perfect
Fast,
segue.
real quick. I just want to add one other fact here that was given to me by Steve with respect to Northridge that I found quite interesting. You have classes like with Mission ending at 9:45, and 5 of the lines that serve CSUN, even in the limited capacity, don't run that late. Metrolink's last train leaves at 5:46 when you got classes ending at 9:45. I'm not suggesting you run the trains, but the bottom line, Mr. Innovation Officer, is you've got very significant challenges for community people here trying to get around in a place that's the 5th largest city in America that are just Northeast Valley we're going to get to, that is just completely without service.
And the other word for that would be
Fast.
low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging fruit.
Real low-hanging fruit. Pre-Measure R getting on the ballot kind of stuff. Salita, welcome.
Just because I'm going to have to leave, I just want to say one quick thing.
Who gave you a mic?
I stole it from Bob. Which is, yeah, it's Bob Conley. And Salita, I really want us to hear, and I'm going to stay for what she has to say, and then I'm going to run out the door. But I wanted to say this discussion is going to continue November 12th. The San Fernando Valley COG is going to, Transportation Committee is going to have a meeting at Van Nuys City Hall on the 12th. So I just wanted to put that out there if anybody wants to continue to talk priorities. We'll build on what we're talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Now, the General Manager of LA DOT, Salita Reynolds.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to? Okay, great. Great.
Anybody who votes on our budget.
Anybody else is right. Any of my other bosses, I'm totally happy to cede my time. I just wanted to put a few things out as food for thought. And, you know, I really appreciated Councilman Blumenfield hosted a West Valley City town hall, very well attended, just on transportation, excellent conversation. I was lucky enough to be at the VICA Transportation Committee almost a year ago, and out at the Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils a few months ago. I figured, I thought that Jill Barad was going to keep me there, maybe a 24-hour shift, because it is an excellent, I love it. It was excellent, involved, and engaged place, and fascinating. Just a few ideas. So first, I think that, you know, sort of in the same line of thought as Supervisor Yaroslavsky was saying, we need to continue to invest in trunkline transit, but we will never build it fast enough to meet the needs and demands that we have today. We must re-examine and redefine how we think about public transit, and how we deliver it, and how we define it. And what I mean by that is right now, in Los Angeles, the number of jobs you can reach in an hour by car outstrips the number of jobs you can reach in an hour by transit, an order of magnitude 12 times as many. If we are going to make our city affordable and keep our city affordable and keep it the fantastic place that it is today, we are going to have to think about things like car sharing, things like bike sharing. We are on the edge of huge disruption in transportation. I think it's going to be great to see what Joshua does at Metro, but this is where we have to insert ourselves and make sure that those things are delivered in not just the communities where the market finds them most profitable, because that first and last mile solution has to be solid if we're going to make good on the investment we've already made. You know, DOT has a transit system. We are the second largest in LA County. That's like saying A&W root beer is like second largest to Coke in terms of soft drinks, but we're number 2. We got the silver, and we deliver that service at a cost that's about 40% less than a traditional transit agency, because we deliver it through competitive bid. And all our drivers are union, but we deliver it in a different way. So when I say we have to think differently about how we define and deliver public transit, those are the things that I'm thinking about. Second, we have to think about balance and trade-offs. Getting the Wilshire Rapid converted to bus rapid transit was a community consensus building, you know, huge lift. But delivering that was very inexpensive and fast in terms of what could be done. But we had to reorganize the way we allocated the space on the street. And that was a tough conversation, and one that I think you have huge opportunities to have here in the Valley because of the tremendous amount of streets that you currently have. And finally, I'll say that as we think about major funding, we have to fix and maintain what we already have. And that's going to be a big tension in any reauthorization or extension of a sales tax measure. If the state legislature doesn't figure it out and leave cities out in the wilderness, which they won't, right, Senator? Then we really are going to have to use some of that funding just to keep the amazing investment that we've already made.
Thank you, Salita. I want to come to our member cities in Glendale and Burbank and San Fernando, but it's such a natural lead-in to FAST. I'm going to ask you guys to wait for one sec. Hillary to talk about fixing Angelino stuck in traffic, specifically Valley, Van Owen, Victory, and a really inexpensive fix that, as David Fleming pointed out, will knock 20 minutes off a commute east-west in the San Fernando Valley.
Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure to work with you on helping organize this as well. I wanted to say that I'm pleased to go after Salita Reynolds because she has been such a leader in looking at what can we do now. And what we are working on is Victory, Van Owen, Topanga Canyon, others. The city and its leadership have already approved as part of the Mobility Element 2035, vehicle enhanced networks, transit enhanced networks, bike enhanced networks. And the vehicle enhanced network that parallels the Orange Line is approved already for Victory and approved for Topanga Canyon. And what we need to realize is that as we do grade separations on the Orange Line, we are going to have to run buses and more service along our corridors. Arterials are extremely important as we think about how we get people to and from transit stations. And one thing that has not been raised yet, and Paul Krikorian mentioned about support for Wilshire BRT. You are one of the biggest supporters there. We need to have additional bus service. Zev, you didn't mention how great the Valley West Side connector has been, and that gets from Mission College to the West Side restaurants. So your culinary support is there. We need to do more to make sure people can get to and from transit stations quickly, and that means improving our arterials. But also, more importantly, as we look at greenhouse gases, think about what it's like to wait for a bus, especially this year. Today, October 26th, it's 90 degrees. How many of us want to wait for a bus in most of the stations here in the valley? We have to
Hillary,
improve
Victory
shade.
and Van Owen.
Yeah, no. So Victory and Van Owen, what we're doing is improving the stations along Victory and Van Owen, moving bus stops beyond intersections so we don't have right turn concerns, and we have improvements to the livability and rest at stations themselves through mobility hubs, which include bike share, car share, and bike parking, because we need to have intermobility to get people to and from our major corridors. If we don't have intermobility, we're not going to really get people out of their single occupant vehicles. This is low-hanging fruit, it's affordable, and it gets people to and from the places they need to go, especially to and from the stations along the Orange Line, and will help us as we work on the construction around the Orange Line. Thank you very much.